Starting off things like we always do, and at number 10 we have the Old Arnold Estate. This farmhouse became infested with strange paranormal activities in the 70s, and it lasted for over a decade. The Perron family bought the house and moved in shortly after with their family, but the previous homeowner left them with one piece of advice: leave the lights on at night. I mean, what the heck is gonna go on at nighttime? Well, the Perron family quickly learned that they weren't the only ones living in this farmhouse. They were visited by disturbing spirits who used to live in the house before them. These spirits weren't evil to begin with, but as the family spent more time in the old farmhouse, the spirits started to misbehave. One of the most infamous evil spirits that occupied this house was Bathsheba Sherman. This spirit would have violent and angry outbursts, and most times she would injure the Perron family. Once the family decided to move out, the paranormal activities didn't stop. The new family that moved in said that the house is full of blue orbs, and strange mist would rise from the floorboards. Furniture and objects would move on their own, and doors would slam shut in the middle of the night. These hauntings were actually the inspiration for the movie The Conjuring. Sounds like to me that this farmhouse is in desperate need of a cleanse, or it needs to be torn down. Either way, I'm not going to be visiting this farm anytime soon. And now at number 9, we're going to be talking about Monte Cristo Homestead. This farm was built in 1876 by a husband and wife who wanted to start their own new lives together in Australia. The family had a great life until one day when their maid dropped their baby down a flight of stairs, her instantly. The maid swore that an invisible force pushed the baby out of her hands. The husband and wife died inside of the house shortly after, and now it is believed that their spirits haunt the farm. Visitors report that they can hear footsteps and voices telling them to leave. Young children also feel suddenly agitated and scared whenever they're near the stairs. The current homeowners say that they feel like they're living with another family, but you just can't see them. Well, you can't see them most of the time. I mean, no, this isn't for me. If I lived there, I would put this house up for sale as soon as possible, and I would take whatever the offers are. There's no way in hell I would share my house with angry ghosts. The Dandy House comes into this list next up at number 8. James Link and his family purchased a farmhouse, and they couldn't wait to move in. Once they drove their moving truck onto the property, their neighbor came out yelling and said, "What are you doing here? You can't move in here." That's not the kind of neighborhood welcome I would want to receive. But anyways, the neighbor told them about dandies. They were the family that used to live inside of the farmhouse. The dandies had witnessed a series of unexplained events. They reported hearing strange chants, and they even saw the bricks from a chimney being removed by invisible hands. They even said that they could feel a burn on their bodies, and there's a male spirit dressed in a plaid shirt and blue jeans who holds a rifle at the end of the bed. Well, that would be enough for me to move out. The Dandy House is still a popular ghost hunting location, but for me, I wouldn't step a foot into that place. A haunted barn comes onto this list in at number 7. This is known as a Von Klein-Schmidt legend, and it goes something like this. A dairy farmer was helping his prize cow give birth when all of a sudden, the barn just burst into flames. He ran out to get his family to help him move the livestock out of the barn, but the whole thing quickly became engulfed in flames, and the family knew that they were in a lot of trouble. They stood in the middle of the barn holding each other as they were waiting to die. The neighbors could see the family inside of the barn yelling and crying for help, but there was nothing that anyone could have done. The next family to own the barn had a similar tragedy. They bought a bunch of cows, but a week later, they all got sick and died. The farmer had no idea what was going on, so he called the vet to come in to make sure that the cows didn't have an infectious disease. But the vet couldn't come up with a logical explanation. It seemed almost like the cows died from just being scared to death. The farmer didn't want to take any more chances, so he sold the barn because of all the supernatural things that's been happening there and all of the terrible things that have happened before. Yeah, I would say that's a pretty good decision, my friend, because something weird's going on that's killing your livestock. A White House farm brings us to number 6. These murders took place in Essex, England in 1985. A husband and wife were inside of their farmhouse along with their adopted daughter and their twin boys. The only survivor was their adopted son, and he was Jeremy Bamber, who was 24 years old at the time. Apparently Jeremy was at home a few miles away when the took place. During the initial investigation, police ruled that this is a murder because they believed that the schizophrenic daughter shot and killed her family and then turned the gun on herself. But the tables turned when Jeremy's girlfriend confessed that he had shot his own family with this semi-automatic rifle, and that's because he wanted to get the large inheritance. So he made it look like his sister did all of the killing, but he was convicted of 5 counts of murder, and he was told that he would never be released from prison. I mean, how the hell do you murder your entire family for money? This guy deserves to rot in jail for the rest of his life. He should just be forgotten about. Or maybe stick him in that barn where all those cows were dying and just see what happens. Elvay Farm breaks onto this list at number 5. Elvay Farm is located in the most haunted village in England. The farm was built in 1406, and since then, spirits have been haunting the farm. A man named Robert de Boyce, while he used to live in the farmhouse, he was known to prey on local villagers centuries ago until he was caught for his crimes. Well, now it is believed that the creepy spirit roams the halls of this house, and he is known to grab people's hair, and they'll pull you in a room and slam the door shut. And then there's another spirit known as Edward Brett. Visitors can hear his spirit constantly whispering, "I will do it." Edward used to own his house until one day he walked to the dairy barn and well, apparently his ghost never left the farmhouse, and now the current owners say that they can still hear gunshots firing and Edward whispering. I would be whispering, is this real life right now? I would be totally freaked out. Scary Creatures pops onto this list at number 4. A farmer in Montana saw a weird looking animal approach his farm, so without any hesitation, he grabbed his rifle and shot him. What exactly did he shoot? Well, we're not really sure. Well, take a look at this thing. From far away, I guess you could say that it looks like a wolf, but once you get close up to it, the animal doesn't really look familiar at all. So experts were called in to identify the body, but they were stumped. They had no idea what that was. They were able to say that this creature comes from the same family as wolves and dogs, but they couldn't exactly figure out which species it actually belongs to. Once pictures of the dead animals popped onto the internet, people started to guess what the animal could be. Let me know what you guys think it is in the comment section below. A lot of people think it can be a dire wolf, or other people think that they can be like a severely malnourished bear. And then there was others who said that this could be like a dog man. I don't know whatever it is, but all I know is I don't want to run into anything that looks like that. Number 3 takes us to a farmhouse dungeon. I mean, that sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. A dungeon looking room was found in a basement of this abandoned Pickering farmhouse located in Ontario, Canada, so not too far from where I live. The room was secured by a heavy door with several locks, and it seems like it was designed to trap someone inside. The room also had steel linked chains hanging from the ceiling, a white bench, and 4 large water jugs. The person who found this room quickly notified the police, but the next day someone had already set this farmhouse on fire. Police became heavily involved with this case, and eventually they arrested a man named Robert White, who admitted that he had been working on this room for over a year, and he planned on kidnapping a woman and keeping her locked up inside his own makeshift dungeon. So this guy was married, he had 2 children, and I can't imagine what they must have thought when he confessed to the crimes. This whole thing happened like an hour from where I live, so it's so crazy to think that someone in your neighborhood could have been captured by this guy. A farmhouse horror takes us to number 2 on this list. A family was looking to buy a farmhouse because they needed a bigger place. They were expecting a new baby, and they thought a new life in the country would be best. So after about a month of living in this old farmhouse, things started to get really strange. The youngest daughter said that she could see a shadow figure lurking on the stairs, and they would stand next to her bed while she was trying to sleep. But of course she was told by her parents that they didn't believe her. But the next day, the mom was going downstairs and the shadow figure pushed her down. The mom hit her head on every step. Luckily, she survived, but that's not where the story ends. The little girl was having problems sleeping, and when she rolled over, the shadow figure was laying next to her. But his face was perfectly clear. He had red eyes, he was pale, he had scaly skin. Well, he went to reach for her face with his long fingernails. He ended up scratching her face so much that the little girl was left unrecognizable. The family left that night and never returned. It is said that this farmhouse is still up for sale, but no one has dared enter ever since. The farm murderer stabs his way into number 1 on our list. Robert Picton was a millionaire pig farmer from British Columbia, Canada. It seems like he had everything made, but he was hiding a dark secret. Robert Picton was actually a and it is estimated that he murdered somewhere between 6 to 50 prostitutes from the Vancouver area. He would cut up their bodies and feed it to his pigs, but things got even more insane. He didn't just feed the bodies to the pigs, he would keep the heads, hands, and feet from some of his victims, and he would put them in his fridge. He also would throw some of them in a wood chipper for fun. Investigators also believe that he would combine human remains with pig parts and took them to a rendering plant in Vancouver to be processed into lipstick, shampoo, and soap. One of his victims managed to escape, but when she told the police what happened to her, they said that the evidence was circumstantial and that they couldn't arrest him. Is this real life right now? She was literally stabbed a bunch of times, and she can give you a full description because she was a prostitute, but you're not going to at least investigate the situation? Well, eventually Robert was arrested and sentenced to life in prison, but he was able to get away with these murders for a very, very long time.
At number 10 we have the Wandering Witch. Something that farms are always really good for is cheap labor. You have some kids, and as long as you keep putting food in their mouths, you can keep sending them out to the field to push plows. I can't think of a better reason to have kids. Soft. Beautiful. The Wandering Witch is someone who would want to take advantage of this exact situation. It's said there's a witch who would travel from farm to farm at night, looking for children who should be asleep but have stayed up too late. She offers them a break from their daily work, a break from working super hard and waking up early to rake leaves and milk cows. She tempts them, and if your will is weak and you give in to her offer, she'll take you into the forest and you'll never be seen again. What does she do with these kids? One endless rave with no curfew? No, she their throats, drains their blood, and then uses it to keep herself young. Hey, we're all out here trying to stay hot. Get it, girl. At number 9 we have The Bride. One thing that I've learned after doing all these top 10 scary videos is never mess with a bride on her wedding day unless you want her to stir up some evil that will never take a day off. The legend of the bride is a classic one. Two young lovers who are forbidden to be together. They run away and set themselves up to be married on a secluded farm. But their parents catch up with them, the young boy is taken away to be, and then the young girl is by her father in her wedding dress on the spot. My god, dude, do you know how long it takes to pick out a dress? Well, her spirit rose up because no one messes with a special girl on her special day. Now it haunts farms looking for her lost love and killing any man who dares to get in her way. At number 8 we have Baby Under the Stairs. Just off the title, you should have goosebumps already. Anything living under the stairs makes me think of a basement dwelling monster that just wants to drag you into some hovel and eat your guts. This story follows a kid who would visit his grandparents' farm every summer. He would always have a great time, he was very close with his grandparents. But one thing that would always make him uneasy is how every night his grandparents' dog would just bark at the barn like there was something in there. The dog would just sit outside of the barn in front of these concrete steps that would lead into the barn and just snarl. Snarl so hard it's like there was some sort of creature inside of there. One day this young kid was going through some old family photos with his grandma. Looking at all the old pictures of his parents, he came across a baby picture that he didn't recognize. His grandma told him that this was a picture of his aunt. She passed away when she was only a baby, and they had a funeral for her, and then they buried her body under the steps leading into the barn. Ooh. At number 7 we have Myrtle's Plantation in Louisiana. This legend was actually researched by National Geographic. So Nat Geo came to this old plantation to take some pictures, and much to their surprise, there was an unexpected person in one of their shots. This was seen in the window. She is said to be the ghost of a young girl who is on the plantation. Now she gets her revenge by photobombing white people's photos. At number 6 we have Man of the Marsh. Some farms perform superstitious ceremonies to help protect them from the man of the marsh. You would take clover and rose and grind it up and rub it on the entrance to your house. If you fail to do this, you might be visited by the man of the marsh. Picture a Swamp Thing but wearing a flannel coat. That's basically it. You would know he came to visit you from the wet footprints he left behind and the haunting sight of an empty bed. Ooh. At number 5 we have El Chupacabra. Now we get to go to Mexico, baby. Pour me a tequila and someone throw some lime on ceviche. We're gonna party. But we're also gonna look out for El Chupacabra. This dude is basically a Mexican werewolf with a better name. He roams around the desert looking for small farms, and when he finds one, you better hope you didn't leave your livestock out because he's about to ruin your whole career. El Chupa's gonna come in and suck the blood out of all your goats until he's satisfied. And then you're gonna end up with a bunch of bloodless goats. And we all know that goats are best with blood inside their body. And he eats kids too, if he wants to. I mean, kids just eat, yell, and crap. They're basically goats without the cool beards. So if you're trying to get rid of a kid, just take it to a farm in Mexico and let El Chupacabra take care of it for you. And if you ask where you got this idea from, it wasn't me. At number 4 we have the licked hand. Gross. If you live on a farm, you probably have a dog. The dog does a lot of things. It lets you know when people are coming, it helps herd animals. And it's just nice to have around for a good friend and a good time. This urban legend is about a girl who lived on a farm and would lay in bed late at night and leave her door open for her dog to come in. The dog would lay next to her bed and lick her hand. And then she would slowly fall asleep. This would happen so often that she would never even check to see if it was her dog, she just already knew. One day she wakes up and her dog is missing. Her whole family goes looking for the dog and then they find him dead. Something had killed their dog. The family mourned that night and then the girl went to bed. This time she slept with her door closed, feeling too heartsick to leave the door open. But when she draped her hand off the bed, something started to lick it. Ugh. At number 3 we have the Hinterkaifeck murders. It's 1922 in Germany. World War I is wrapped up and the Germans have taken a big L on that one. Everyone is probably still feeling the effects of getting their ass handed to them on a global scale. And a little family living on a farm hasn't been heard from for days. Someone goes to investigate and what they found was one of the most horrific scenes known. An entire family and their maid was with a blunt force weapon. Each one of them, including their 2-year-old baby, had been to death and then hidden in the farmhouse. This might have just been a psycho cascade, but something very creepy about this is that there was a maid who was working there just 2 weeks before and she quit because she said that the farm was plagued by evil spirits. And who or whatever killed these people took care of the livestock after the people were killed. There were signs that all the animals had been looked after each one of the family members met the grave. At number 2 we have the old Arnold estate. If you buy a house from someone and they tell you you should leave the lights on at night, just move out right away. Right off the bat, your electrical bill is going to be stupid high if you have to leave the lights on all night. And what could be so horrible in the house that it makes you keep the lights on? I've never heard the story of turning your lights off at night and then Scarlett Johansson comes to visit you in your sleep and gives you $100. No, that's not one of them. Well, the Prawn family moved into this estate, they got this warning and still decided to stay. And then stuff started going crazy. They would see blue orbs fly through the house, furniture would get moved, mist would rise from the floorboards, and a ghost named Sherman would get violent with the family. I think after that, they moved out. At number 1 we have the blue body. A family was renting a farmhouse while their new home was being built. One day the youngest girl in the family and her friend decided to do a little exploring. They were walking through the bushes when they came across a dead body tied to a tree. Obviously this scared the hell out of the 2 girls, so they sprinted back to the house. When they got home, the little girl told her mom what they had just found, and the little girl's mom called the police. The body was that of a mannequin, so you shouldn't freak out. What should freak you out is that there was 7 dead bodies buried around the mannequin, one of which was an old resident of the house they were staying in.
Starting us off at number 10, the Alberta graves. One morning, an Albertan farmer was out doing his daily rounds to check his crops when he came across something truly horrifying. A human skull. Immediately afraid there had been someone killed and buried on his farm, he called the authorities to come and take a look. Thankfully, it was uncovered that it was a very old skull dating back to the 19th century, but it didn't come without its mysteries. It appeared to belong to a girl and it was surrounded by rings, buttons, jewelry, and a lone thimble. All these knickknacks would suggest she was of high status, but experts were still confused as to who she was. She had been buried nowhere near any known indigenous communities of the area and prior to the European settlers' arrival. But she was wearing what appeared to be a European military coat, leaving everyone more confused and more unsettled than when they started. Next up at number 9, oil spill. In 2013, after a few days of smelling what he thought to be crude oil, North Dakota farmer Stephen Jensen finally stumbled across the disaster. Steve was a wheat farmer and while harvesting some of his crop, he discovered jet black oil bubbling out of the ground. After some investigations by officials, it was discovered to be from a nearby broken pipeline owned by Tessero. The oil spill stretched roughly 7 football fields, and although not much wildlife wildlife is known to live there, all the grain within half a mile was no longer fit to be consumed, making miles of his crops worth nothing for the next 2 to 3 years. Eventually the leak was repaired after a hefty $4 million was put into the incident, but Stevens still had to head into a legal battle to try and get compensated for the current and future income setback. Coming in at number 8, criminal cash. Back in 2015, Colombian farmer Jose Cartolos was given a grant from the government in order to start his palm oil plantation. While digging an irrigation trench for the project, Jose kept coming across strange blue containers stuffed with cash across his property. Eventually, after many hours of digging, Jose discovered a whopping $600 million hidden across his field, and it's believed to be linked to the infamous criminal Pablo Escobar. Of course, Jose was not permitted to keep the fortune, but it did have many wondering where else the criminal could be hiding cash. And even worse, would anyone be coming after him for uncovering it? Next up at number 7, a mysterious safe. One morning, Kirk Mathis, a New York farmer, stumbled upon a mysterious and haunting safe in one of his fields. The peculiar discovery was left with a note attached stating that whoever was able to open the safe could have what's inside. It was extremely heavy, at least several hundred pounds, which certainly raised some eyebrows about what was inside, as it took heavy-duty equipment to move it from where it was found. Once word of the mysterious box spread in the media, folks were dying to know what was inside. Though many have attempted to open the safe, none have been successful, and it seems like that is the way the farmer wants it. He says the safe remains hidden on his property and that he has no plans of opening it up anytime soon. Maybe he fears it's cursed, or maybe he just wants to keep the fantasy going. But either way, it is a truly unsettling thing to find in the middle of nowhere. Coming in at number 6, an Irish tomb. In 2021, a farmer stumbled upon an ancient and mysterious tomb thought to be about 4,000 years old. Although the initial discovery seemed harmless, once experts were able to get inside, they found it was filled with human remains. Prior to the farmer discovering the tomb, it appears to have been virtually untouched, which is incredibly rare and all the more unsettling. Experts still don't know just exactly what the site was dedicated to all those years ago, and hey, maybe it was simply a burial plot. But considering it appears to have been unexplored for centuries, certainly sends a shiver down your spine. Could it be that it's hiding more than it appears? Did we awaken something that was meant to be hidden? I sure hope not. Coming in at number 5, an ancient hidden mural. When farmer Lucas Ramirez decided to renovate his home, he never in a million years dreamed that he would uncover this. Back in 2005, Ramirez went ahead and removed the kitchen's plaster to find ancient Mayan murals underneath. The images are believed to be at least 300 years old and look to depict when the Spaniards found the community and forced the locals to build a church that to this day still stands. But could it be bad news that these murals were found? Was there a good reason that they had been covered up all those years ago? Once news broke of the Ramirez kitchen discovery, others in the town began tearing down their walls too. 4 more homes in the area uncovered murals, and of those 4, one signified the end of times, showing fireballs falling from the sky and rage from the gods. I mean, I am no expert, but that can't be a good sign. Coming in at number 4, the Metapec creature. As the legend goes, one night a ranch hand named Urso Ruiz had set up some rat traps, as was a normal routine for him. But this time he would find anything but his normal catch. After hearing a strange noise, he, along with some of the other farmers, went to go and check out the trap, and they found a creature unlike anything known to man. The creature was about the size of a small cat, with smooth, whitish gray skin and a large head, and was said to possess a scream like nothing they'd ever heard before. Very terrified, the farmers killed the creature, thinking it was some kind of alien. Then strangely, only a few days after the incident, one of the involved farmers actually died in a car crash, causing some believers of the conspiracy to think that he had been cursed by alien overlords for killing the creature. While there are people out there who believe the whole thing to be a total hoax, many believers of the conspiracy continue to stop at nothing to prove the existence of this strange alleged creature. Next up at number 3, a body. One poor South African farmer made a gruesome discovery while surveying his cane fields earlier this year when he stumbled across a dead body. The man he found appeared to have been shot in the back of his head as well as his arm. The farmer was terrified, worried that whoever did this could still be around, so he immediately called the police. Authorities confirmed the man was indeed killed, but still have no clue who did it or why, and have no clue if there are any connections to the man who found him. Not much else is known as this is an ongoing investigation, but let's just hope they figure out who did this before it happens to someone again and it's too late. Coming in at number 2, Maine chicks. While there are many complaints that can be said about postal service delays, this is by far the worst. In 2020, across New England, thousands of farmers were receiving horrifying deliveries in the mail. One farmer in particular, Pauline Henderson, had ordered 800 chicks for her farm, Pine Tree Poultry, and upon delivery, all 800 were dead. This was extremely unusual. As Henderson mentioned, maybe 1 in 100 would not make the journey in usual shipments, but during the time of these specific postal issues and delays, it's estimated that 4,800 chicks were delivered dead on site in a matter of weeks. Not only did this cost the involved farmers thousands of dollars, but it sent an uproar throughout the United States about the distress caused to the animals during their time in shipment. And last up in our number 1 spot, a UFO encounter. The year was 1974 and a Saskatchewan farmer witnessed something that would change his life forever. While out swathing his fields, Edwin Furr saw a bright light in the distance. Initially, he assumed it was just the sun, but as he got closer, he says he saw a strange, floating, spinning object that he could only assume was an alien spaceship. He stood motionless, staring at the terrifying metal object, and watched as it spun quickly round and around. Then, all of a sudden, the object emitted a gray vapor from underneath and disappeared in the blink of an eye into the sky. The only trace left by the strange UFO was a pattern of 5 rings in his crop fields, classifying this alleged sighting as a close encounter. The field went under a great investigation, but to this day, no one has been able to settle once and for all what Edwin saw that fateful day.
Number 10. Underground civilization. In the Cappadocia region of Turkey in 1963, a farmer was doing some renovations in the basement of his farmhouse, where he'd been living for decades, caring for the land and livestock. As part of the renovations, he needed to knock down a wall to add and change existing structural supports, but when he broke through, he found something truly amazing and unsettling. When the hole opened up, it revealed a cavern, leading as deep as 18 stories into the ground that contained an entire subterranean city, known as Derinkuyu. This amazing system of caverns and rooms was large enough to house up to 20,000 people, and was expertly carved and full of surprises. Meeting halls, freshwater wells, and shops were among some of the places that were discovered inside. The ancient residence had even constructed heavy stone doors to keep its residents safe from dangers, whatever those may have been. Experts still have no idea who would have built or inhabited this underground metropolis or when, making all of this more unnerving. A society like this should have been well documented, yet it's impossible to discern who lived there. Now, before I move on to number 9, please hit those like and subscribe buttons so we can keep bringing you the most amazing videos. When the local sheriff's department in Santa Rosa, California received a call from a local farmer about a suspicious vehicle parked on their private property, they most likely expected a routine trip to find someone sleeping in the vehicle or perhaps trying to burglarize the farmhouse. But when they arrived on the scene, no one was to be found. The car was parked in an area of the land that made no sense. There was no reason for anyone, even the farm owners, to be over on this part of the field at that time of year, which perplexed the officers. The only clue was a hat on top of the car, which implied that the owner left it there and was most likely close by. They heard some noises from some nearby equipment, and upon further investigation, they found a man stuck inside the shaft of a large fan, and he told the officers that he'd been stuck in there for 2 days already. When asked what he was doing there, he stated that he liked to take pictures of old farm equipment, and that's why he climbed in. However, to quote the sheriff, A thorough investigation revealed the farm equipment wasn't antique and that the man had far more illicit substances than camera equipment, and the motivation to climb into the fan shaft remains a total mystery. Number 8. Bee body. On a Sunday afternoon in Lorenzo, Texas, Rogerio Zuniga was tilling his fields with his new tractor, when suddenly he heard a crunch and his tractor stopped dead in its tracks. He'd hit an old irrigation pipe that had not been used for years since he upgraded the system. He should have known that this pipe was there, but a broken tractor was the least of his problems, because when the pipe broke, a massive swarm of Africanized bees poured out of the hole. Rogerio quickly hopped off and ran as fast as he could, swatting at the bees as he went. But hours later, when the family looked to the fields and saw the tractor sitting abandoned, they went to investigate and found Rogerio only 100 yards away, lying lifeless on the ground, submerged in the bees. According to his sister, his body appeared to be tattered, with gaping wounds saying the bees shredded him. When the fire department attempted to clean out the pipe so this tragedy could not happen again, they noticed that the bees were moving towards another massive hive further down the pipe, towards the house where his family lived, and so it was also disposed of. Number 7. Manitoba Monster. In 1976, a farmer called the local police department outside of Brandon, Manitoba, and claimed that he had found a body inside of a hay bale, saying that there was a bone sticking out, but it looked too large to be a rodent or any other animal that could have been caught in the baler. When police came to investigate and examined the bones found at the scene, including a partial jawbone, they confirmed it was not human, but could not confirm what animal it was, as it didn't match those of any wild animals that lived in the area. Perplexed and realizing no crime had been committed, the police gave the bones back to the farmer, who allegedly still has them, displaying them on his wall so visitors can try to decipher their mysterious origin. Now, have you heard or experienced anything creepy or unexplainable out in a farm field? Let me know in the comments below. Number 6 is a tragic tale of one choice that led to catastrophe. In 1937, Wisconsin farmer John Wazik was feeding the animals in his barn when he heard a massive boom. He instantly knew what had happened, and he ran outside to see his house was now nothing but a flaming pile of wood. Earlier in the year, John was cleaning out the pump house of old tools and items left by the previous owner, and came across something incredibly dangerous. 50 sticks of government-manufactured dynamite. And instead of reporting it to the police, he decided to keep it. But fearing for the safety of his family should someone find it, he hid it in the cellar of his house. His son Raymond was playing in the basement and must have stumbled across the volatile explosives, and while John was in the barn, a horrible accident occurred, and the explosion of 50 pounds of dynamite lifted the house off of its foundations and destroyed it completely, tragically taking the lives of his wife and 8 children, leaving John as the only survivor. Number 5. The Terracotta Warriors. In 1974, while constructing a well on their land, a group of Chinese farmers came upon one of the most important archaeological finds in the history of the world. As they were digging deeper and deeper, one shovel hit a stone, or so they thought. When they looked closer, they could make out a face on the stone, and they believed that they'd found an ancient sculpture of some kind and began to carefully unearth it more, revealing a life-sized warrior made out of terracotta, a clay-based ceramic. They alerted the authorities, who then brought archaeologists to the scene to continue excavations, but what they found was something unthinkable. Over time, they unearthed over 8,000 sculptures, many of warriors, some riding in horse-drawn carriages, but each masterfully crafted with unique faces and features on each. They were so well preserved in the ground that some even still had color on them, and they were constructed to guard the 3rd century emperor of China, Qi Shi Huang. I've had the pleasure of seeing these for myself, and I have to say that the craftsmanship and sheer amount of work put into these amazing sculptures is truly breathtaking, but I'm sure it gave the farmers quite a shock when they saw a face peering at them from the dirt. Number 4. Grecian Tomb. George Dvorsky was coming home from a trip into town to his olive grove in Crete, and as he was parking his car in a shady area, he felt the ground give way slightly. Not wanting his car to get stuck, he moved and parked somewhere else nearby. But later, a neighbor informed him that a 4-foot wide hole had actually opened in his driveway, and when they looked inside, they saw a large open space filled with boxes and containers made out of ceramic. When researchers came to study the find, they discovered that these boxes were actually coffins, and the room was indeed a tomb, the final resting place for 2 men from 3.5 millennia ago. Along with the stone coffins were various vessels scattered along the ground, including 14 ritual Greek jars and a bowl. The quality of decorations of both the tombs and the other items suggested that the people buried here were quite wealthy, though they may have actually been the stonemasons that made the tomb itself. It's impossible to know. All that I know is that if I found a box of bones while parking my car, I'd call the Ghostbusters before an archaeologist, just to be safe. Moving from ancient Greek civilizations to ancient Romans, our number 3 spot belongs to the discovery of an entire Roman city beneath a farm in Northamptonshire, England. Only half a meter below a remote part of the land lay this incredible archaeological find of a nearly 2,000-year-old settlement, which is even more impressive because it stayed hidden until 2022, when other dig sites already existed in the surrounding area. Among the uncovered ruins were a Roman road, foundations for 30 roundhouses, coins, scales and weights, and glass vessels and jewelry, showing the affluence of the society that once occupied the land. There were also multiple sets of shackles found, indicating to researchers that this city may have been a part of the slave trade at the time. Number 2. Dead Sea Scrolls. In 1974, the same year the terracotta warriors were discovered, a group of teenage sheep herders were tending to their flock near the ancient city of Jericho when a member of their flock went missing. They searched nearby and noticed some caves up above on the hillside. One of the boys went to check for the lost animal and, not finding him, threw a stone into the darkness of the cave out of anger. But instead of hearing the familiar sound of stone on stone, he heard something crash and break. When he went to investigate, he found some broken pottery and inside some tattered pieces of papyrus. He called the rest of his friends over and they found many more jars with scrolls inside of them. And thinking that they could make a quick buck, they sold them to an antiques dealer in Bethlehem for $50. This would later be realized as the single biggest mistake of their lives, as those supposedly worthless pieces of paper were actually some of the earliest pieces of the written Bible and have since sold for millions of dollars. This unexpected discovery is widely regarded as one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. And finally, we reach number 1, the Columbia Shuttle. On the cold morning of February 1st, 2003, a massive boom awoke many Texans from their sleep, and the reason for it rocked the rest of the world. The space shuttle Columbia had inexplicably broken apart upon re-entry to the Earth's atmosphere, breaking up into hundreds of thousands of pieces, littering the sky with fire and metal. The explosion also tragically took the life of all 7 astronauts who were aboard. Many people who heard the explosion looked to the sky to see debris hurtling towards the ground at insane speeds and hid inside. And when the dust had settled, they went to investigate the damage that had been done. Some of the pieces found were the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, and others were only 2-inch tiles, as most of the shuttle had disintegrated from the heat of re-entry. One farmer who went to inspect his land found the charred helmet of one of the astronauts. Others even found body parts. After the FBI and NASA had completed their investigation and cleanup, around 36% of the space shuttle's pieces were found, and remains from all 7 astronauts were recovered. These brave scientists and adventurers who tragically lost their lives in one of the worst space disasters in our history have a monument constructed in their honor in Arlington National Cemetery.
Starting us off with number 10 is Albert Engel. Now this one's pretty messed up, but we like to start these lists with a bang now, don't we? Back in 1916 in Wisconsin, Albert Engel impressed everyone in town with his very realistic looking scarecrow. So much so his neighbors went to his house to ask how he had made it. But when his family answered the door, they said that Albert hadn't been home for days. The next day, another neighbor heard about the scarecrow and decided to check it out. But the closer he got, the more he realized that something was just off. It wore a wide brimmed hat, so you couldn't really see the face of the scarecrow, but up close the neighbor realized to his horror that the scarecrow was Albert Engel himself. Police were immediately called and Albert's death was ruled as his hat was still on when he so maybe people just assumed he was a scarecrow when perhaps that wasn't his intention at all. Either way, how did people think he was a scarecrow when he clearly had skin on his arms and not straw? But maybe that neighbor was the first one to see him up close, who knows? Coming in at number 9 is the Friendly Neighborly War. I mean, I don't know how friendly you guys will think it was after hearing about it, but yeah. Mary Hammond, a California resident, used to hate the sight of her neighbor Luigi Lugo. You know when you just don't like someone for no reason, but everything they do just you off, like them breathing, the way they eat literally anything, well that was how Mary felt about Luigi. So in 1911, when he put up a scarecrow that looked exactly like him, she went insane. She went over to his yard, grabbed the scarecrow and brained it, beheaded it and tore it limb from limb. Mary was then arrested for battery but then was set free during trial because it was a bloodless murder. Honestly, if she did all that to a scarecrow version of him, I wouldn't be surprised if she ended up going for him in real life after that as well. At number 8 we have the House of Scarecrows. Now that sounds like a really shabby 90s horror movie, but thankfully it's not. This one comes from Redditor Killer Orange Cat. Now some people live in small towns, but this guy lived in a trailer in the hills. A small town would have been a dream for him, his words and not mine. But anyway, the user's friend had a 13-year-old brother called Brody, and they all thought it was high time for him to learn how to drive. They took the user's car, put Brody in the front seat, cracked open some beers and went on their way. The roads they were driving on had no streetlights and the roads themselves were poorly maintained and very old. The boys were shooting mailboxes with a BB gun for fun, and they found a gated house that seemed long abandoned, and the boys started shooting the gate, as you do. The gate was locked with a padlock, but they managed to break it open with a bolt cutter. The car drove in and illuminated a very old looking house and a bunch of shadowy figures in the yard. Somehow, I don't know how, but somehow the car got stuck behind something and everyone got out to try and unstick it from its area. When the user finally looked at the yard with a flashlight, he was horrified. He saw dozens and dozens of scarecrows. I'm talking different sizes, different outfits, different genders, and it wasn't just a shirt and a hat. They were properly dressed in recognizable outfits. Some were in dresses or suits. There were even children's scarecrows, which were the creepiest part. It seemed to be depicting a party of sorts. Either way, just as he was taking this in, his friend shot one of them in between the eyes, or in between the buttons, if you will. And that was the end of that story. Filling our number 7 slot is the floating hat. Now in Beaufort, Australia, a couple of kids thought they could pass their afternoon by throwing stones into a nearby reservoir. This was 1908, before you say why didn't they just play with their iPads or whatever. This is when people actually still went outside. Whilst throwing the stones, they saw a coat and hat floating in the water and just assumed it was a discarded scarecrow and proceeded to use those as target practice for the next 2 hours. After some time, the boys decided it would also be a good idea to check out the coat and the hat, so they did. They found the body of John Cuthbert's son, a retired engineer who had previously said he was done with his life. Police guessed he drowned himself and the stone throwers were never questioned. But I love how the first thing they thought to do when they saw something human shaped in the water was throw rocks at it. At least check first, kids. Now at number 6 is a scarecrow in the cornfield. Now this one's also from Killer Orange Cat. Apparently living in a trailer in the middle of nowhere lends itself to a lot of scarecrow stories, which I appreciate, so thank you. This one took place before computers and mobiles. He used to visit his grandparents who lived on a farm, and that farm had a lot of cornfields. Occasionally him and his cousin Carl would sit on the roof and look at the stars. One day his granddad needed help with the scarecrows in the field, and when he walked by he swore one of them moved. He didn't think anything of it, and that night him and Carl went on the roof to watch the meteor shower happening that night. The sky was obviously stunning, but when he looked at the field, the same scarecrow looked like it had moved again. As he looked away, the scarecrow apparently jumped down from its post into the field. He screamed and told Carl, and he also confirmed the post was empty. Carl figured it must have just fallen and they left it there. A while later, the user saw the scarecrow emerge from the field and then it ran back into the field. The next morning, the scarecrow was on the porch with no stuffing. Right, remind me to never visit a cornfield for this very reason. Coming in at number 5 is Mr. Rogers. Now this one is slightly funnier than it is scary, but I thought number 5 may be a good halfway point for some comic relief. In 1903, BC Rogers and his wife were on their way home via horse and buggy, and they were riding along a river. They were looking at the riverbank and saw a woman and a little boy standing there, but then all of a sudden the boy lifted the woman and threw her into the water. Mr. Rogers, the noble man that he was, stopped his horses and tried to find the woman but couldn't see her anywhere. The boy had also disappeared, so he had no idea what to do. He ran to the nearest village and asked 2 men to help him find the woman's body, but again they came up empty-handed. He went back to the buggy and went to the nearest farm and spoke to the farmer there about the incident, maybe thinking he might know where the body was. The farmer ended up telling him that his grandson had gone to the river and disposed of an old scarecrow by throwing it in the river, essentially making his whole day's effort good for nothing. But I feel like there are better ways to dispose of a scarecrow rather than just throwing it in a river, you can throw it in the bin. You can burn it, I don't know. At number 4 is the Baden Regiment. It's common knowledge that troops fighting for any side had to think of creative ways to stay alive during the war. So in 1914, towards the start of World War I, French troops were on the move, but so were the German Baden Regiment. To survive another day, the French decided they had to do something drastic. Using the fog to their advantage, they went and got a bunch of debris and sticks from a nearby field and made scarecrows out of them. After putting their own hats on the scarecrows, in the thick mist they looked like helpless soldiers. Some troops were sent to lure the Germans to the field, and when they saw the scarecrows, they charged. They fell into the trap hard and they were surrounded from all sides by the French, and 100 of them were killed. After that, using scarecrows and dummies became a lot more common in war practice. If that was me, I would have been so pissed that I got myself lured into this trap and it was just a scarecrow. Like, I would have been shooting myself in the foot, but I wouldn't have had to because the French would have been shooting me all over anyway, so there's that. Filling our number 3 slot is the missing corpse. Now, in Wales back in December of 1953, a group of workmen were clearing some fields, which meant basically finding and throwing a bunch of debris into a bonfire. At one point, they found an old scarecrow stuck in some undergrowth and decided to just toss it into the fire as well. But as the clothes started burning away, the men started seeing bones being left behind. Confused as hell as anyone would be, the men went back to where they found the scarecrow and did a little more exploring and came upon a set of false teeth and a skull. Obviously, it was too late to save anything from the bonfire, but the police did manage to identify the body based on the dentures. They belonged to 66-year-old Ethel Winifred Collins, who had been missing since August of that year. Now at number 2 is the surprise. Now this one happened way back in 1909 in Pennsylvania. Maud Hefnagel was walking through a cornfield with her friend on the way to church when she saw something lying on the ground. She assumed someone had knocked over her dad's scarecrow, but when she walked over, she screamed and full on fainted. To her horror, she found the mutilated body of her father on the ground. Her dad was walking home on the same path and was attacked by a bunch of men, and he failed to overpower them and he was hacked to pieces. His money was taken, anything valuable he had on him, everything was basically taken. A robbery that took a very twisted turn. The story ended up being printed in newspapers all around the country. I would also probably faint if I was going to a patch of grass and thinking it was a scarecrow but it was my dead dad. I think anybody would. Maud, I don't blame you. And finally, at number 1 are the wives turned crows. Female scarecrows are usually rarer than male ones, but they do exist. Now in 1906, there was a Hungarian farmer called Jean Plozzi who was slightly stingy, let's just say. When his wife passed away, he used her body as a scarecrow in his orchard to scare birds away from his fruit trees. If that wasn't weird already, the same thing happened with another farmer 4 years later in Amsterdam. Why are all these men just using their wives as scarecrows? I really don't understand. Although the marriage was seemingly a happy one, the man still loved his crops more than he did his wife, and also dressed her corpse up in one of his old suits and made her a scarecrow. Neighbors freaked out at the sight of their once alive neighbor, now a dead scarecrow, and called the police on him. Thankfully, I don't know how thankfully it was, but thankfully he found out about it and removed his wife's scarecrow before the police got to his house. He didn't kill her for this purpose, by the way. She died naturally, before people think that. He didn't just kill her for this. He's not that messed up. But still pretty messed up for using his wife as a scarecrow. Starting us off with number 10 is the lion attack. Catherine Chappelle was a very interesting American tourist. She was actually a special effects editor and had worked on Divergent, Captain America, and even Game of Thrones. Impressive resume, I must say. But anyway, in 2015, she visited a lion park in Johannesburg, South Africa. She was being driven through the park and was taking a bunch of pictures and decided to ignore the signs that warned to keep windows closed at all times. The tour guide driving said she rolled down the window on her own accord to take photos, and then a lion attacked her through the open window and mauled her to death. What's even worse is that the 66-year-old tour guide had a heart attack as he tried to fight off the lion. The situation ended well for nobody. I'm sorry, I feel bad for the tour guide, and I feel bad for Catherine, and I feel bad for the lion. Coming in at number 9 is Harry the hippo. I don't know why English zoos thought it was okay to employ untrained teenagers to look after the animals, but it was a pretty common practice throughout the 20th century. Let's just get these clueless people to handle these very large, unpredictable animals. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Well, let's ask Richard McCormick. Richard grew up in Coventry and started working at Whitley Zoo in 1966. He initially looked after the parrots, then it was the elephants, and then the bears, and finally it was Harry the hippo. One of the things he had to do was clean Harry's cage. One day he opened the door to his cage, but the safety barrier that usually came up was broken, and the door flew open and hit Harry up the bum. I don't know how it hit him up the bum, I thought maybe it hit him on the bum, but it hit him up the bum. Already we know this is going south very quickly. Harry grabbed Richard's head between his jaws and dragged him to the pool. He felt his ribs crack and he was terrified that he was about to die. His body was hanging from Harry's jaw and he had had his tusk removed a few weeks prior, otherwise that would have just gone straight through Richard. Thankfully the headkeeper heard Richard's screams and managed to hit Harry with an iron bar when he re-emerged from the water. Harry dropped Richard and he scrambled to safety, screaming and crying that his back was broken. In the end, his collarbone and ribs were broken and his liver had been punctured. Harry the hippo, you sound like a children's book character, but you turned out to be the complete opposite. At number 8 is the tuna explosion. That sounds like a lovely seafood dish at a restaurant, and I guess the story sort of ends up that way a little bit, kind of, maybe. This one's from Reddit user Electoric Television, who used to work at an aquarium in New Jersey. They had a massive ocean tank filled with yellowfin tuna, and the tank was massive, 780,000 gallons of water, 70 by 70 foot wide from overhead. Like, it was huge. Now, yellowfin tuna are some of the fastest swimmers in the ocean. They can reach nearly 45 miles per hour underwater, which makes for very cool viewing when you watch a school of them zipping from one side of a tank to another. One day the user was helping out at a dive show and the amphitheater in front was filled with kids on a school trip eagerly watching the tuna. The school of tuna were making their way fast from one side to the other and all of them made the turn at the end except one who couldn't do it fast enough, and it straight up slammed into this thick acrylic window at full speed and exploded. His words are not mine. Having other carnivorous animals in the tank like sand tigers, stingrays, sandbar sharks, loggerhead turtles, not carnivorous but still will literally eat anything, it became a feeding frenzy and the kids were screaming murder as they were trying to run away and climb over each other. The girl with the mic has no idea what to do, the diver in the tank has no idea what to do, the tuna doesn't know what to do, nobody knows what to do, and eventually the audience is just sitting watching this unfold. The sharks ended up tearing the tuna to pieces and chunks of it were just floating in the tank all day. Filling our number 7 slot are the little ducklings. Out of all the stories on this list, this one legit surprised me the most. Redditor Transcendental used to work for a zoo and this was one of their favorite stories. They claimed feral ducks were a huge issue for the zoo because they had a lot of birds anyway, so these random birds used to come to the zoo for free food and whatnot. With that came a lot of ducklings who would wander off without their mothers. And this is when the story takes a very bad turn. One day a group of ducklings found themselves in the orangutan enclosure and well, it's about to get really graphic. In front of a group of guests, the alpha female in the enclosure began to pleasure herself with one duckling by putting it in and out of her area, all while she was staring at the gathering crowd watching her. After seeing this, the alpha male, obviously having none of this, grabs another duckling and squeezes it until it pops in his hand and then proceeds to throw it at the glass barrier where the guests were. The body of this little duckling is just sliding down the window, smearing it with blood as the kids are screaming and crying, and you guys probably are too, and I'm sorry. Now at number 6 is a suicide attempt. Yeah, I agree, those words aren't exactly the first things you think of when you think of a zoo, but here we go. In May of 2016, a 20-year-old man in Chile who suffered from mental problems and depression unclothed himself and jumped into a lion enclosure located at the Santiago Metropolitan Zoo. The man was mauled by the lions and authorities had to kill 2 of the lions in order to save the man, who was quickly rushed to the hospital with serious injuries. A suicide note was also found in the pocket of his clothes, and that was obviously the reason he jumped in. Overall though, it was the zoo staff that were the saddest after the incident because 2 of their lions were killed really for no reason. Had everyone just followed safety protocols, no one would have had to die, but this man just had to jump in there, didn't he? I mean, obviously I've seen articles and read ways about how people can commit suicide, and I would never have imagined this would have been a possibility, and now I know. Coming in at number 5 is Binky the polar bear. Now Binky lived at the Alaska Zoo in Anchorage, and the zoo pretty much had an elephant and some other donated animals until Binky came along as an orphaned polar bear cub and essentially became the most popular attraction there as well as a local hero. And that's exactly what 29-year-old Australian tourist Catherine Warburton expected when she visited the zoo back in 1994. She scaled and jumped over 2 safety rails in order to get a close-up photo of him, but it just didn't end well. Binky stuck his head through the bars and grabbed her, breaking her leg and leaving bite wounds. It took employees 3 days to get Catherine's shoe back from Binky after the incident. But in all fairness, I don't want to say she deserved it, but what did she expect after climbing not 1 but 2 safety rails that had been put in place to prevent incidents like this? Sadly for Binky though, 6 weeks later, a bunch of drunk teenagers thought it would be an awesome idea to go into his enclosure and swim in his pool. No, no, no. One teen was hospitalized with leg lacerations after he was mauled. Again, I don't want to say they deserved it, but come on, how was that a good idea in any way, shape or form? I know they were intoxicated, but still. At number 4 are the wolves. April 18th, 1996, at the Halliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve, newly hired caretaker of the wolves, Patricia Wyman, was found naked and dead inside the wolf enclosure. Suspects seemed to be 5 adult North American grey wolves. So what led to this gruesome attack? The wolves had grown up in captivity all their lives, but were not socialized to humans, so whenever caretakers used to enter their enclosure, they kept their distance. Patricia had been inside the enclosure twice beforehand. However, the day before the attack, she told her fiance she was worried about the alpha male in there. The next day, she entered the enclosure by herself, and her body was found naked, covered in bite marks, and flesh had been ripped off from her extremities. The wolves growled at the officers when they entered the enclosure, which is a defensive behavior they do around food. The coroner ordered the wolves to be killed the next day and tested for rabies, which came back negative. But investigators just couldn't figure out why she would enter the enclosure alone despite her worries the previous day. One theory was she simply overcame her concern and went in. The wolves could have circled her, and she may have fallen over fallen trees and broken branches, and they just attacked her when she was down. Again, that's a lot of speculation and not a lot of fact, but humor me folks. Filling our number 3 slot is the tapir. Now I didn't know what a tapir was, so many of you may not either. Tapir is basically a big herbivore, and it sort of looks like a pig with a short nose trunk, but it's a lot bigger and its legs are a lot longer. I could go more in depth about this, but I can be David Attenborough later on, so let's move on. On the morning of the 27th of November 1998, zookeeper Lisa Moorhead was feeding a tapir called Melody. All of a sudden, Melody bit her left arm, but Lisa wasn't gonna go down without a fight. She fought back hard and suffered lacerations on her face, a punctured lung, and Melody ended up tearing her arm off from the mid-bicep area. Sadly, it was just too contaminated and mangled to be reattached. When I googled it, it looked quite harmless, so I was just hella surprised when I read this story. Now at number 2 is Mina. Janet Coughlin worked at Seaburn Zoo when she was 13 years old. She initially used to work at the kiosk and chop fruit for people who wanted to feed the monkeys. She remembered the zoo saying it was a disaster and the animals were locked in small cages and they were just going insane. One day in 1978, she was asked to help clean out 13-month-old Mina's pit. Mina was a Bengal tigress for the record. Janet had to hold the gate to the pit open while the zoo owner's wife brought out Mina, who had been locked up for God knows how long. She came out and reared up on her back legs and came down on Janet. The cub began to claw her face, and at the time she thought she wasn't gonna get away, but thankfully she managed to. She was completely covered in blood. Mina had ripped open her face and she had a huge wound from her right cheek to her jaw. According to Janet, it was over so quick she barely felt it. A paper cut had hurt her more in the past. Alright Janet, I can't really relate with you with that one. She ended up getting 250 stitches in her face and it was swollen big time to the point all her food had to be liquidized just so she could eat it. She believes she survived because Mina only intended to play with her and not harm her, which I also believe. And finally, at number 1 is the private menagerie. So from the name, you guys can guess this story didn't take place at a zoo, but at Terry Thompson's large private menagerie. Terry was a Vietnam vet who had been collecting exotic animals for years, but one day in October 2011, he freed dozens of his enclosed animals from his Ohio home and shot himself in the head. A little while later, his neighbor called the police after seeing a lion and bear just walking outside his house. If I saw that outside, I'd do a double take and be like, where the hell am I? The police finally came to the site and saw Thompson's body being eaten by a white tiger. They stormed the home with rifles and freely just started hunting the animals. I mean, is that even legal, by the way? Like, I swear they can't just open fire on animals they just find. I don't know, I'm probably wrong, but still, I just feel like that's not moral. The policeman went on to say that tigers were the hardest to deal with because they kept ambushing them even after being shot. By the end of the whole ordeal, 18 tigers, 17 lions, 6 black bears, 3 mountain lions, 2 grizzly bears, 2 wolves, and 2 monkeys were all killed. That is a massacre if I ever heard of one.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the golden toad. The disappearance of the golden toad is the first extinction in history to be blamed on man-made global warming. Good job, guys. What better way to kick off this eye-opening part 2? The golden toad extinction event happened pretty recently and pretty quickly. In their home of Costa Rica, it was considered a good omen, or it was lucky if you saw it. I mean, obviously, it's a golden toad. If this was Super Mario, that would for sure be a star. You know, it catches the eye, it's beautiful. But then sightings became more and more rare come 1987. It was no question these little dudes were disappearing. Not just golden toads either. Nearly half of all frogs and toads within a 30-kilometer radius were dying off. Thing is, there weren't any humans around here either. People weren't scooping up golden toads and taking them back. The area was free from human interaction, which tipped scientists off. Now we can conclude that the cause was for sure climate change. See, as it got warmer and warmer, the frogs became more susceptible to the chytrid fungus, which was already destroying frog populations worldwide. And we of course just didn't help. Sorry, golden frogs. Number 9, aurochs. The great-great-great-grandfather of our modern day cattle. These big boys were quite aggressive, but humans were of course way worse. Classic. Eurasian aurochs were these massive wild ox that walked gracefully through the lands of Europe, Asia, and Siberia. The average height for one of these guys was around 6 feet, but their horns made them appear much larger. See, because of these impressive horns, they were viewed as aggressive animals. So often in ancient Roman arenas, they were used for sport. So that surely didn't help. They were aggressive when locked inside a death arena. Wow, get out of town, really? You don't say. By the time the 13th century rolled around, the only humans allowed to hunt aurochs, because their number was so low, were royals and nobles. This animal is endangered, unless you're rich, I guess. Come 1564, there were only 38 left, and 1627 marks the last time one was seen alive. She died in Poland due to natural causes. It wasn't, warriors this time around. Number 8, Aliotra gribe. Sounds like a Harry Potter spell, let's do it. These guys were a species of grabe, which are aquatic diving birds, and they made their homes in the beautiful lakes around Madagascar. Throughout the 20th century, their population was rapidly declining because of habitat destruction, as well as the introduction of the blotched snakehead, which then began to prey on them. First their homes were reduced, and then this bully of a fish swims in and starts taking names. Double whammy, sorry guys. Their extinction was official come 2010, which is super recent when thinking about something like the dodo bird. Scientists were hesitant to officially classify them as extinct because of the fact that their home is so remote and tiny. They were hard to find. There were thorough surveys in the area in 1989, 2004, and 2009 that all failed to find any remaining evidence of the species, and on top of that, the last confirmed sighting was all the way back in 1982. If you're thinking maybe they flew away, good idea, but think again. These guys had tiny wings, so traveling long distance was a no-go. It's believed they couldn't have found a home. Pretty sad, right? Well, hit that thumbs up and we'll do a part 3 to wash it all down. Number 7, the dodo bird. Remember these funny dudes from the movie Ice Age? Well, we wiped them out too. Pretty much. They were once big and beautiful. These flightless ground nesting birds once filled the island of Mauritius, located in the Indian Ocean. They had massive talons, they were gray and blue, they were beautiful, they didn't have any natural predator, all was going well until we came along. Around 1507, the island was discovered by Portuguese sailors, and the rest is history. They were the easiest bird to hunt, hence the phrase dead as a dodo. They weren't just loved by sailors either, we're not 100% to blame here. There was monkeys, rats, pigs, any animal that made its way to the island easily had their eggs for lunch. So it didn't take a long time for the dodo bird population to be completely wiped out. The last dodo was hunted in 1681, and if it wasn't then, it would have been like a year later. Imagine dodo bird chicken wings now? That's all I'm saying, we're kind of the worst. Number 6. Catarina pupfish. Not to be confused with the Catalina wine mixer, the Catarina pupfish was a species of fish that was first found in 1972 and was endemic to a spring located in Nuevo Leon, Mexico. The species of fish was seen to be rapidly declining in the 80s and 90s due to their habitat being disrupted by groundwater extraction. You know the phrase leave some for the fishies? This is what they kind of meant. This led scientists to try and save them by bringing some into captivity, which sounds weird, but hear me out. It turned out to be more difficult than anticipated. In 1994, the fish ended up being extinct in the wild, so the only members of the species remaining were the ones brought back into captivity. Sadly, the last remaining male of the species passed away in 2014, which was when the species became officially extinct, because you got it. Number 5, the Labrador duck. Long before we ate this bird to extinction, the Labrador duck was a rare sight to see. Also referred to as the pied duck or the skunk duck because of its coloring, we really don't know much about this guy to this day, behavior-wise. We know that it liked to hang out in sheltered bays, harbors in New Jersey, Long Island, New England, and of course coastal Labrador. Did it honk or did it beep? That's a deep joke right there. The honk and the beep, different words for different places, you get it. The Labrador duck went extinct in the 1870s, and it's because, we believe, we ate it to death. The bird was known to taste bad, but it was pretty cheap for meat in the market, so you get it, Bob's your uncle. Long before duck hunt, these birds were also hunted either for eggs, feathers, or just for fun. Another reason they went extinct is because we stole their lunch. The ducks were often in competition with us over their main food source, mollusks. The last known specimen was shot in New York. Yeah, shot like a mob boss. What a sad way for a species to go out. Number 4. Bulldog rat. I'll be honest, I'm kind of glad the bulldog rat is no longer a thing. It's disgusting, I don't like rats, sorry. Check this unit out. Known to be even larger than black rats, the bulldog rat was last seen around 1903, the same time speed walking was introduced to the Olympics. Coincidence? Completely, absolutely. They have 2 to 3 centimeters of fat on their backs, so gross, with short tails and thick hair. Yeah, a rat with thick ass hair. Not a fan. Again, sorry if you're a rat person. I can't even look at these things. I didn't include any images when I was writing this. Despite this thing not sounding holly and or jolly, its home was that of Christmas Island in the Indian Ocean. Sailors were responsible for this extinction. They pulled up to the island, Christmas Island, and brought with them no gifts but black rats riddled with disease. Yeah, it took less than a year to wipe out an entire rat species. Hashtag rats with fat. Number 3, Pyrenean ibex. The horns on this thing? Are you kidding? What have we done? The Pyrenean ibex went extinct around 2000. They said the world was going to end, and for these guys, it did. A subspecies of the Spanish ibex, the Pyrenean ibex were native to the Pyrenees Mountains on the border of Spain and France. See, back in the medieval ages, their population was reduced drastically to an endangered level. They were all over, but you know, knights and swords and bows and people were hungry, they obviously didn't last long. That and disease spread by humans, that also played an important role in their demise. But here's the craziest part and the main reason I wanted this guy on our list. They tried to clone one back in 2003. It failed, obviously, but a cloned extinct animal. Sounds familiar. Number 2, the woolly mammoth. Believe it or not, scientists are trying to bring this one back from extinction. Yeah, it was announced only months ago that a team of scientists and entrepreneurs over at a company called Colossal are planning to bring the woolly mammoth back to life. The last mammoth alive was around 7,500 years ago, right at the end of the last ice age. They want to put them back on the map. Literally, they want to put them back in the Siberian tundra. Thousands of years ago, it was once full of these hairy behemoths, but climate change slowed them down a bunch. Humans also didn't help. They needed food, and these guys provided warmth and, well, look at them. Lots of food. I can't wait until science brings back the woolly mammoth, and then in like 50 years, they get to go extinct all over again. Like, let's just learn from mistakes, I don't know. And finally, coming in at number 1, the northern white rhinoceros. We had the western black rhinoceros in part 1, so we might as well finish on the sad reality that is the 2018 extinction of the northern white rhino. There are no more males left. The last male passed away in 2018, so this is just a lost cause really when it comes to saving these guys. On top of that, in recent news, one of the 2 remaining female rhinos is being retired from the international breeding program put into place. Her name is Najin, she's 32 years old, and she lives in a Kenyan nature preserve with her daughter Fatu. Now, both Najin or her daughter are able to carry a rhino calf. Their only hope really before this was to collect the rhino's eggs, send them to a lab, and then they extracted sperm from the 2 deceased males, and scientists were hoping to implant them into a surrogate mother from the southern white rhino population. The group running the operation, BioRescue, spoke out recently. The head veterinarians Frank Goritz and Stephen Gulu said, "Retiring one individual from a conservation program because of animal welfare considerations is usually not a question to think about for long, but when one individual is 50% of your entire population, you consider this decision several times." Yeah, 32 years old, more than fair. This isn't on her or her daughter. It's on poachers, probably. Cheers.